Anyway, so I guess we can start out with. Well, I mean, I have trouble interviewing actors. I guess I could do it as James Lipton. So, how are you today, Trenton Bennett? How are you?
Doing quite well, thanks.
Doing quite well. Okay. And so let's talk about your career. I mean, you're an actor. How long have you been active as an actor?
I had done a little bit of acting off and on, and when I first realized that some of the voiceover work I had done, the voice acting, was something I really needed to shape into a career, I ended up reaching out to a coach who said, you know what, go do some more acting and get some proper lessons. So about
Hmm.
4 years ago, actually about 6 years ago now, I went out and I got some acting lessons. And I went through some interesting things with community theater, learning a lot, kind of paying close attention to what everybody was doing, involving in a production of how to succeed in business without ever really trying. It was a fun play.
Yeah, it's a good musical.
It was, and
Yeah.
that was the other thing about it. I had never sung on stage. I'd certainly not done much performance on stage. So to suddenly find that I've got a really good voice and they like me and they've got me carrying a couple of neat scenes, that was a delight.
So from that, you've branched out to having a career as a voice actor, and I assume you still do community theater and live theater as well, too.
I ended up moving away from the local community theater, but with the voice acting, what I had done is I realized there were a lot of different disciplines to pour into, but audiobooks was what really called out to me. So I took formal training with a couple of coaches in the ACX Master class. And at the end of that class, before it was done, I was landing audiobooks, and almost all of my time has been in front of a mic doing an audiobook ever since for about the last 3 years.
So this production that you did, June Cleaver, Sexual Deviant, that's an actual play that you got to narrate as an audiobook. What was challenging about that?
What was challenging was knowing that the audiobook listening audience is probably not used to hearing a play read to them, but the material was so darn entertaining and funny that I wanted to give them a feel of like they were watching a performance and they're in their mind they can set the stage as they hear me talk and get that story out of it that they really enjoy.
What about the story was so appealing to you?
I grew up as a kid that some of the folks older than me would say, you can't possibly know these things. You're not old enough to know these things. But I grew up fascinated with Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and The Three Stooges, all of these older television and film things. And that culture itself kind of fascinated me too, because my parents were the American graffiti generation. They grew up in the
Mm.
1950s. They were teenagers when poodle skirts were a thing, and they went through that whole decade kind of coming of age. So all of
Hmm.
that had always fascinated me anyway. But what really drew me to June Cleaver Sexual Deviant was it's a very tongue in cheek social satire that takes, I guess, some of our favorite sacred cows and shows us that we can still take a look at them now and, in a little bit of a reverent way, kind of poke fun at the way things have changed.
Was there any particular character that kind of appealed to you more than others that you identified with
Well,
or felt sympathy for?
the main character, June Cleaver, really has it all together. And it's interesting because you see that through the lens of an adult in the 21st century and realize that that character would have had a lot more struggle than any 50s television show would ever give you. But I think the other thing I enjoyed was Betty Crocker as this sultry seductress, someone who was really strong and independent, and absolutely the antithesis of that whole stay at home and be the homemaker and make the cookies kind of
Hmm.
persona, was just delightful.
When you imagine the play, I mean, how do you imagine the characters? I mean, when you were coming up with voices, how did you kind of develop that?
It's so fascinating to me to do June Cleaver Sexual Deviant knowing that it's a script because when I read an audiobook and I read a story, in my mind, just like any reader, I'm envisioning the characters in their space, in their world, dealing with their problems. And as I'm reading this, in my mind, they're all actors on a stage. They're playing the
Hmm.
role, and I'm helping them play that for them. So I had these visions of them moving stage left, stage right, of the sets themselves not looking completely realistic, but you're kind of peripherally aware. At the same time, when an audiobook listener likes to have a book read to them, most of them really need a certain pace that doesn't line up neatly with a stage play. You have to give them time for the words you're speaking to land in their ears and their mind to form the image you're trying to give them. So I have to slow my roll a little bit And at the same time, while I'm slowing my roll, I need to be able to still keep a sense of that comedic timing that you'd have on stage.
Yeah, and that was when I was listening to it. It was one of those, I like the slower pace that you brought to it, but I also, you still had the characters and they were very live and three-dimensional the way you vocalized them. I was very impressed with that.
Well, thanks.
So,
I feel like as a narrator, I get to be your director. It's like a stage play. I'm the director and the producer, and I also get to be all the actors, all the characters. And as a result, I set the scene with just the right pace for someone to get that in their head. And then I let them go like they're real people when they're speaking. So that was kind of part of it, I think.
is there anything about the play that was kind of difficult for you or challenging?
I think probably the most challenging part of it was Joe McCarthy. And I say that because I really take the performances seriously. I want these to be good. I'm not going to sound exactly like him, but I went out there and I dug up a lot of different video and audio recordings of him speaking, and I listened to him and I mimicked his tone. All of that was recorded on 1950s equipment, so it's going to sound a little bit tinny. And I had to kind of draw out what would he be like if we were in the same room together, to voice his actual sounding voice with that slight monotone of seriousness that he put in everything he said.
The character of Joe McCarthy, I mean, the way that the play is written, it can be played by many actors, or it can be played by a cast as small as, I think, 6 is what I ended up with, kind of writing it. I've been fascinated by plays that can do doubling and tripling in a way that's funny to be staged. A real great example is the 39 Steps, if you've ever heard of that stage play. It's based on an Alfred Hitchcock movie that's based on a 1910 book. And
I'm familiar with the movie, but I haven't actually read the book or seen the play or any of that.
In the play, it is a cast of 4 characters that play every character in the movie. So there's a main character, a main female character who plays 3 women, and then there are 2 clowns who play everyone else. So like the landlady and the landlord, or the innkeeper's daughter, and the milkman, and the cops that are chasing them, the bad guys, the villain, they're all played by several people. And it's just fun to see them do those quick changes and stuff on stage. And it was one of those, I had done that show when I was kind of doing my second rewrite of June Cleaver. And it was something that I just loved from that show. And I was like, I need to steal that. And I admit I stole it. So,
well, I can relate to the identity crisis that would create, because I'm all those folks and they're all kind of in my head, and I'm really trying to bring them out. That's funny because I'm trying to imagine. I'm going to have to see that because that sounds delightful.
Yes, it's a fun show if you ever get to be in it or see it. You've obviously been doing a lot of audiobook narration. Are there any books that you had done before that felt you kind of got preparation for doing a play as an audiobook?
It's funny. I keep thinking about how the community theater experiences I had and the little bit of training I had along the way, those informed this audiobook more than any of my audiobook work. That said, the pacing, really, knowing that my audience, we tend to listen to who our audience is going to be in our heads. We imagine what we call the audience of one. Who is that person that I'm doing this performance for? And in this case, my audience of one was an audiobook listener. So someone listening to an audiobook needs that sense of pacing, but I need to play it like this is a play. If that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense. Is there anything that you felt was, with the play, there are stage directions, but it's not as poetic and, I guess, trumped up as the description you would get more from an audiobook or a novel? Was there something that you felt was a little bit more difficult dealing with that?
I feel like the best thing about that is I had a good relationship with you, the author, as we were working on that, because sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes an author doesn't want to be involved, or they're like, look, that's not my space. You just do your thing and hand it to me. I felt when I did the audition that I had a good sense of the direction once I reached out to you and said, what's your intention? And there were a couple of spots where I would be able to say, okay, how should we do the direction for this? For example, when McCarthy is fading out and leaving the scene and the lights are going down, that's not something that's easy to voice and have someone visualize. Those little nuances we could touch up together, but the rest of it, I feel like it just felt right. It felt spot on because the play was in my head. And when I'd play it back while I was producing this audiobook, I'm like, okay, putting on my listener hat, I can imagine this correctly.
Mm-hmm. Have you been looking for other plays to do this with, or have you been asked to do more plays since you've kind of released? I am curious to see if you've presented this as something like, hey, I can do this too, or are more playwrights reaching out to you for this through ACX
It
yet?
hasn't been out for very long, but I expect that will
Uh-huh.
probably happen within the next 6 months to a year, at least one or
Mm-hmm.
two of them. And I say that only because there probably aren't a lot of playwrights who are putting their script out on Amazon and Kindle and then intending to go ahead and move that into the audiobook space. And I feel like this production will set a good example for them to understand how they could pull that off. I'd certainly be glad to do more.
Oh yes, I have another couple of plays. Well, one of the things is the play that I have that is already published is a very female heavy cast. I only have one male actor in it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to do this again, it'd be one of those, you'd have to play like 5 or 6 women voices, or I'd have to find a woman who would be the actress who could do the voices, and maybe have you do some sort of collaborative work with that. With audiobook narration, I mean, how many projects would you say you're doing a year now?
Well, it's interesting. I typically try to only take on one at a time, maybe two. And what's happened is the snowball has started rolling. I'm a voice actor. I can do a lot of different things, but audiobooks has been calling my name more frequently. And so, for example, this year, I've actually lost track of how many I've done right now. I know it's less than 10, but I do know that the reason I've lost track is I'm currently working on 4. I finished yours, and I've got another one all in the pipeline within about a 3.5 month space. And that's a lot of work for me.
Mm-hmm. Keeping this project separate and having the different narrative styles, do you have a preference, I guess, on terms of genre, nonfiction, fiction, stuff like that?
I've come to enjoy, and this isn't really a non-committal answer, I've come to enjoy just about everything, partly because when you're a really good audiobook narrator, you fall in love with your material.
Mm-hmm.
I've done Christian and romance and drama, science fiction and fantasy. I grew up loving science fiction and fantasy, but I also read so many other things that I
Mm-hmm.
feel like any material, if it's well written, that's going to be what I'm going to love doing, and I will fall in love with that work.
One of the reasons I enjoyed your audition and chose you as an actor is because you seem to have a very, I don't want to say your voice is funny, but you have a good comedic tone and you have a good timing, I felt, when you were doing the deliveries of the audition piece. So, I mean, it was one of those, once I've heard you do June Cleaver, I was like, I wonder what this guy sounds like when he's narrating science fiction or autobiography. It's like, I can't imagine you reading like Undaunted Courage without being, and then Lewis and Clark, you have a witty banter kind of tone from what I heard when you were doing the audition. So I wanted to compliment you on that.
Well,
So,
thank
yeah.
you. I appreciate that. I do a podcast with a buddy of mine that's deliberately humorous, and that's one of the things we love is that chemistry. When it all comes together, whether you're doing improv on stage or you're just creating a fun, funny dialogue for your listeners, there's a certain joy that you can convey to the audience because, like I said about falling in love with material, it's difficult sometimes not to laugh at your own jokes. And it was also hard not to laugh at your jokes. So I kind of enjoyed the fact that I could read ahead, I could get a good chuckle, and then when I played the scene out, I could do it without cracking up.
Uh-huh. Well, thank you. I'm glad that I was able to crack you up. That's one of the things about being a writer, particularly of like, I also write novels, but being a writer, I feel like I get inside my own head. I'm like, is this joke only funny to me? I feel like I've just made a joke and laughed at it and there's no one else in the room and I might have schizophrenia. So when I get to hear the feedback that, oh, yeah, it is funny. It was really great to do. It was fun. It's like, oh, great, good. I'm on the right track. And you get that more with writing drama than you do with writing like science fiction or I guess the other thing I'm trying to work on now is urban fantasy. What's up next for you? What are you going to do after we've put the book out and we're selling it like hotcakes? What do you want to do next?
Well, in general, as far as the projects, I'm finishing up a 4-part series of short stories that are kind of more like a men's adventure with science fiction flair. It's near future technology. I'm also working on a Christian romance story for a rights holder that we have a really good relationship, and this is a new author, so I'm hoping to help carry them into the audiobook and the printed space well. Going forward, I really kind of enjoy playing like I'm running a board on Jeopardy, and I'll take potluck for 500. Let's go for that, Alex. It's so for me, looking ahead, if I find something that I really see as intriguing and would be unusual and has a potential, that's what I'm going to grab. Now, for June Cleaver, Sexual Deviant, I'm looking forward to being able to play up both the comedy and social satire angles and try to show everybody, social media, YouTube, whatever it takes, get them out there listening to this and laughing at it and kind of poking fun a little bit about social conventions without feeling as awkward and tense as people seem to do these days when they discuss these things online.
That's just it. The play does deal with some weighty issues. And do you feel that it treats them irreverently at all? Because I feel like I'm going to get some backlash from certain groups for what I wrote. And it's like, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to make fun. I'm just trying to discuss it in a way that's safe and funny.
The genre of humor that they call dark humor that's kind of got a mean-spirited to it, I feel like some of that comes out from time to time, and some people are going to find that shocking at first. But there's one thing really brilliant that Harry Shearer once said about comedy. He was talking about just in general, but he said comedy really is kind of bringing up the very worst of humanity out into the light, where all you can do really is laugh at it. And in this sense, I'm not saying these characters are awful or their predicaments are awful, but sometimes in the name of social satire, like there's a point where June is explaining the very thing that we all know, that sometimes when a teenager finds themselves pregnant, we just go take care of that quietly. We have a system for that and we don't talk about it. And those things, on the one hand, those are really difficult, uncomfortable subjects. But on the other hand, the matter-of-fact way in which this American iconic house mom just talks about how, well, of course you don't want your child, dear. Why would you do such a terrible thing to a child as to have it grow up with an unwed mother? You know, she goes on this tangent about that. That's wonderful social satire because it makes you realize, oh my gosh, we do really feel this way sometimes. Sometimes human nature does get this dark, and yet at the same time, it's just kind of normalized. It's how we accept things. So strange.
I guess another thing that has concerned me about the play is I'm from the middle of America. I'm from Kansas. And writing this play, I wrote it in Kansas when I was at University of Kansas in Lawrence here. And it was one of those, I was writing this play thinking, this is something that is probably never going to be performed in my hometown. That's one of the things I thought about when I was finishing. I was like, this is a play that my family might read, but no one in my hometown is going to perform it. And that's kind of the wall I was hitting with trying to get it produced here or trying to get it produced elsewhere. Because if you send the script out, they kind of want you to come and be a part of the production process far away, or they don't know you and they're like, I don't know this person. Why should I put on their show? Huh. So that's kind of why I started to think about, okay, I'm publishing these things online as opposed to hoping some producer will one day find it a slush pile. It's like, I'd rather have people reading it now and listening to it now. And then, hey, that was funny. Maybe we should try and stage that. You know, that's the way I kind of want to be putting my work out there. Is like, hey, you can find it online, buy it for $15-$20. And then if you like it, you can ask me to put it on. And I will be more than happy to let people put it on.
You know what fascinates me about that, though, is that the characters themselves, they're not making fun of themselves. They aren't laughable in an irreverent way. You make these characters very genuine, who they really would be. June is self-aware of being a TV mom, and at the same time, she's also self-aware of her responsibilities in her life and everything she's had to do. So when they present that material, it's so different from whenever someone's doing political humor and they're poking fun at the left or the right, two contentious things in America today. They tend to come up with a straw man and present that and make a ridiculous scenario so that you're laughing at the ridiculousness of the other side. This isn't like that. This really feels more like they're going, these are things that we do every day that we treat matter-of-factly, but the truth is we're all the same. We're very human. We have the same interests and desires and dilemmas.
And do you feel that it's better than the straw man tactic? I mean, I don't really feel like there's a villain in the play. Do you?
No, not at all. If anything, the closest we have is the romantic foil of Betty Crocker, and she herself is being the strong, independent, defiant of convention person who sometimes they talk about, well, never meet your idols because that star that you admire might turn out to be a jerk. Betty's not a jerk, but she's definitely not the cheery, smiling face you see on so many cookbooks and baking products.
Yeah. But and that was another thing is like dealing with these characters. I mean, these characters, they were created originally by other writers and or other companies, and they kind of became these icons. It's like, no, this is just my take on that face. Who was that person? Because we don't really know that backstory, or we don't know who they really were. And it's kind of like maybe this is an alternative history of things. I don't know. It's another dimension of reality.
I feel like you're trying to tell a story about America using America's icons, but you're doing it in a way it's not disrespectful to them. It's more like it's playfully poking fun at the things that we kind of know under the covers, but we don't always acknowledge. And I say that because it's almost like people don't go suing Mad Magazine because they did a parody of something. They get the idea that satire is bringing it out in the light and telling it from a different angle to give you a different perspective.
So in the recording, I mean, but you listened to the stuff and you also gave me the ability to listen to it. Is there anybody else that you had involved in the production process that you know, like passed it off as like, am I doing okay here? Did you kind of share anything with anybody else?
No, it's interesting you should say that because that is something that I could have done. But at the time, some of these characters were ingrained enough with me that the big thing for me is earlier this year, I had some really good coaching from one of the top audiobook narrators in the business, Johnny Heller. And one of the things he pointed out to me when I was doing a read of a female character that kind of was difficult for me to convey, as a male narrator conveying a female character, it's more about trying to get the breath down pat and make the voice sound slightly different. And I say this not just for me, but when I first started in this industry, my coaches and my peers, male and female narrators, were all saying, this is how you do the opposite sex when you're doing the voice. So Johnny Heller kind of helped cool me down and not make these so dramatic any more than if you're doing a Scottish character, they shouldn't have a really strong Scottish bear like a cartoon character. They should have something a little more subtle and a little more believable. So with them, I dialed it back a little more. I did not make it subtle. I said, okay, these women are iconic. Betty Crocker and June Cleaver, they have very specific voices and patterns of speech. I need to go ahead and channel all those memories of June Cleaver talking, of, you know, the women on the Dick Van Dyke Show, Father Knows Best. I Love Lucy to an extent, though not as loud and raucous, because that's a different kind of comedy. And make those more feminine because this is a comedy. This is a satire, and we're creating a little bit of a, I won't say cartoonish, but just a little bit of a more abstract portrayal.
So I guess one of the ones I wanted to ask is, were there any scenes that you had to take a break from and be like, okay, I need to stop?
You know, it's funny you should say that because one of the voices I knew I could really nail was Ward Cleaver, because I have a knack for doing those kinds of voices and throwing them into the 50s sound of the Fuller Brush Man. You know, I really enjoy doing those kinds of sounds, but I needed to be sure that Ward didn't sound like a caricature because he has a rough way to go in this story. And he is someone who takes a lot more concentration because on the one hand, he is going senile at certain points, and then he is a young man with different motivations at other points as we time travel back and forth. But he's also very self-aware of his predicament and very insistent that while he's no longer this dominant male head of household because the world doesn't work that way anymore, nor does his mind or his life, he at the same time knows the same rights and wrongs and the ways to behave and treat people. And that has to come out.
With Ward and the senility, his voice didn't really change so much as his tone, I guess, between past scenes and present scenes. That was one of those things when I was writing the play. People were like, you jump around in time so much, it's confusing. It's like, well, it is until you can, you know, stage it in your head properly. You can see it happening. So that was one of the things that I really was, with doing an audio version of the play, it really kind of smooths that over a little bit. So I felt that worked.
Theo is the glue that kind of makes these scenes stick together easily. She is the smooth shifting as the play shifts gears back and forth dramatically. She kind of makes those transitions easier because she pops in and says things like, that doesn't make sense. I don't understand. And she gives you that vehicle to explain.
Yeah, and when writing the play or when writing certain stories, it's like, okay, you have to frame it, and it's like, what? Why is this story happening now? And who is the story being told to? And Theo basically is the first audience member. She's the framing device. She's the person who's hearing these stories for the first time, or this version of the story for the first time. So she's kind of like the everyman or the every girl that the audience member can kind of identify with. It's like, okay, we're with her. We're on her shoulder through this. That's how I kind of went with it. Any thoughts on the overall meaning of the play? I mean, do you feel like it leaves the audience with some sort of thought or some sort of feeling? Or did it leave you with some sort of thought or feeling at the end?
There are two main pieces. One is when McCarthy comes in, he is a stark reminder that their lives faced challenges, and many people's lives did during that time, and it was a difficult time for people. So they come out of that a little bit worse for the wear, but obviously they're still kicking. And then
Hmm.
I feel like you gave this kind of warm, beautiful ending that any good play is going to have. When the lights come up and the cast bows and everyone applauds, you need to have something that leaves everybody with a good feeling in a play. And stories don't always have to do that. Stories sometimes can end with a bang, or they can end with a cliffhanger. And instead, you wrap up everybody's emotional issues. Their resolution comes very neatly and smoothly, and it's kind of sweet because you feel like, yes, I got a window into the world of these characters, and I'm not going to walk out going, but then what happened? Or, gosh, they just kind of stopped talking and it was over and I didn't get any resolution.
When I was studying playwriting and when I was studying working with other playwrights as a student, there were times when I'd see plays that would end very abruptly or they'd end very dramatically, like, oh, and then there was the axe is about to fall and the lights go out, end of play, that kind of thing. And it's like, oh, if you're going to cut someone's head off, show it. You need to show it to the audience. I'm sorry to be that ghoul that says, hey, you need to go full Grand Guignol. You have to have like splaying blood and all that stuff. Or
Shakespeare would back you up on that one.
Oh yeah, he there's a scene in Macbeth. You have to decapitate that guy on stage. Do it. It's like, well, you can stage it so he's and you just have to bowl a head down. It has to land in the front row of the audience in that little old lady's lap. There are certain things, or you come to finishing an act, or you come to finishing a short story. You have to have a certain polished kind of finished nail. The finishing touch, that little quirk that makes it so the audience is willing to breathe, put down the book, and then maybe come back if there's another chapter after that. But it's called that breathe moment at the end of the chapter. And you can have a little bit of a cliffhanger too. It's like, okay, I have to come back and finish this, go on to the next chapter. But you have to have that moment at the end of a chapter or at the end of an act where it's like, okay. Stopping place, intermission, get my popcorn, go pee, come back. The thing that I've noticed with plays that I really enjoy is they aren't going to necessarily have a sequel. They don't need one. They stand alone because they have that moment where everything's wrapped up and punctuated.
When you're talking about how your story has to wrap and at the same time you have to draw the audience in without wearing them out, you have to give them that lull for popcorn. I don't know if I have that luxury as an audiobook narrator because with a play or with a movie, you're more likely to have a captive audience, and I'm more likely to be vying for your attention when you're in the van taking the kids to school, or you're on the treadmill, or you've got a long commute. And I'm hoping that the fact that our story has a beginning and a middle and hooks you and gets to the end is going to keep you listening.
Okay, is there a role or a story that you want to narrate that you haven't yet gotten to?
It's going to sound crazy, but there is one story that I love so much and have experienced in multiple media that I would love to narrate it. It's a story that actually has been my most successful demo. I've had multiple gigs where the author gives me the job and says, I just offered it to you without auditioning because I loved your demo of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams.
Very good. That's a good one. I love that. I love that book series, actually.
I've read the book, I've seen the BBC show, the Disney movie. I'm very familiar with the radio play, and I read the radio scripts and just loved that whole experience across the platform. And doing the demo, I'm like, okay, so I can't mimic any one of those because that's not going to be any fun. I need to take this holistic view of all the pieces that I've listened to and try to make my own performance without mimicking too closely. There are some things that the author expressed about the characters that has to come through, but that doesn't mean I have to sound like this actor or that actor.
All right. And who's your favorite character in Hitchhikers?
You know what? It's funny because we all want to identify with Arthur, but I honestly feel like Ford Prefect is the one person who knows what's going on.
I always liked Ford, and the one I always identify with, even though he's like the jerk and he has no plan and he's just a complete and utter moron, Zaphod. I always love Zaphod. It's like Zaphod's the guy that walks in his underwear and is like, I'm here to make trouble. It's like, thank God we have that guy, you know.
I totally related to Zaphod when I was younger. And then when I was older and I had absorbed a lot more British comedy, I started to realize that Zaphod's pretty much the American in the group.
I know. And it's one of those, I appreciate British humor when it makes fun of Americans like this. Like, yeah. I'm not saying I'm that guy, and I'm not saying all Americans are that guy, but I know that guy. He's in my brother's bar. You know, I've seen it. You're doing most of the audiobooks narrating by yourself. Are you doing any voice work with groups of people or on projects? I mean, are you thinking about doing more audio plays?
Last year, I started to get into the romance space, and I enjoyed doing that. And it's very common in romance that you'll have a male and female narrator playing the different roles, and the chapters alternate between the two. I'd love to do a project like that. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Any other things you want to bring up before we start wrapping it up? Do you have anything you want to say to our listeners out there?
I honestly feel like it's difficult because I wish I could write a review for June Cleaver Sexual Deviant, but it would not come across as sincere because I'm the narrator. I'm naturally supposed to be a little biased. But the truth of the matter is, this fantastic social satire is hilarious. It's timely now, and yet it's a wonderful kind of poke at the past. I love that story itself. I hope other people will take this up. They'll listen to it or they'll read it, and they'll get the idea and have a really good laugh themselves and feel better at the end of it. Because it's not about trying to choose sides or set a left or a right balance or start an argument like so many people do online these days in 2019. It's really just this fun little irreverent social satire that's delightful from beginning to end.
I can't really write a review of the play or your narration, but I will say that I enjoyed your take on the characters so much, and it really did bring it to life for the first time. I mean, I've had one staged reading I did back in like 2014 of this play, and since then it's just kind of been sitting in my desk, and it was the first time I got to kind of take it out and hear it again, and it really brought it back to life, and it got me really excited about writing comedy again, which is why I started writing another comedy. So I want to thank you very much for all the hard work you did, and for kind of, I remember writing this comedy. I was good at writing comedy. I should write comedy some more.
You definitely should. I enjoyed it, and I'd love to think that somebody local is going to put that on here. I'm actually in Tampa, Florida.
You're in Tampa, Florida. Okay. Well, it'd be nice. It'd be nice to see production stills someday from I don't know where in the world or the country, but it'd be nice to finally see someone dressed as June Cleaver acting in my play and be like, oh, I'm gonna like that on Facebook and send you guys like cupcakes in the mail. Thank you. Yeah, it'd be nice to send them cupcakes and be like, from the guy, like I can't bake. I'd be like, yeah, the guy who can't bake sends cupcakes. It's like, I used Betty Crocker's, one step, just add water. It didn't work out well. Here, but yeah.
The ghost of Betty Crocker is tormenting me.
Yeah, she does not like her iteration of my play. And I guess I want to wish you good luck on future projects. And if I can help you promote them in any way, let me know. And if you want to I don't know if I did a good interview here, but if you need someone to interview you ever again, just let me know. I'm happy to do it.
I think you did a great job, Ben. This was a lot of fun. I also really do want to wish you luck. I think this is great.
Anyway, all right. Well, I'm going to wish you a good night and good luck, and I'll be hearing from you and talking to you later through we can either Skype again or we can just do email for a while.
That'd be awesome.
And keep bouncing those ideas off me. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.